You are listening to Life's a Vacay podcast, a weekly podcast series focusing on living a life without limitations. I'm your host, Cha Jones. Each week, I interview purposeful people about what they do and how they do it. Some have traditional professions, while others have designed unconventional careers. But what matters most is that they all are living a life where business and pleasure never separate. Each day is a vacay. So let's get started. Good morning, Jasmine. How are you doing?
Doing good. It's Friday. It's snoozy, gray, rainy Friday, and I can't snooze, but it's all right.
It is Friday, and for the first time ever, I forgot it was Friday. So that lets you know how 2024 is starting. It's gonna get better though.
It will. It will.
Well, I am excited to talk to you today for so many reasons. You're an expat, or you used to be an expat. You know what that life is like. You're also a writer, a ghostwriter, a new author, all the things that I love. So let's just jump right in. Um, you lived in China,
I did.
and you lived in China for 5 years. You have a husband, and at that time, you had two small girls.
Mm-hmm.
What possessed one to just pack up their things and say, you know what? Let's go to China.
That's a really good question. So my husband and I both played sports on the college level. We were both scholarship athletes. And as you may know, when a school says that we're going to pay your way through school, that means at that school so that you can play sports at that campus. What that meant was, although both of us wanted to be study abroad students, we couldn't because we were tied to a scholarship. So my husband had an opportunity to take a French scholarship and he would have been able to study in France. I was a Spanish minor and I wanted to go to Spain. And we were both on the campus of Mississippi State. He was playing football and I was running track. And so we started to date and then we started talking about marriage. And I said to him, listen, I just need you to know at some point, I'm living overseas. This has always been a dream of mine. And that dream was planted in me by my dad, who was in the Navy and he had seen the world. And so he would talk to me about one thing that he always talked about was watching the sunrise over the ocean. And he would say it is the most beautiful thing. There's nothing but water. It's just you on this vessel that seems big, but when you're in the ocean, it's very tiny. And nothing between you and the water and the sun and God. And he would always talk about what an incredible experience that was. And then he would tell us about Vietnam and Taiwan and all these places that he had visited. And I just wanted to go. So I always knew I wanted to live overseas. Well, we got married. We moved a couple times. We had one kid, we had another kid, and we all know the story. You know, people say that they're going to do stuff and then life happens and then they don't do it. So we had a friend at the time we were living in North Texas, and we had a friend whose husband had just got hired in China to go teach. And I was like, oh yeah, people, they do that. And another friend of ours, she and her husband had lived in Korea and they were teaching. And so one day my husband had just got home from work. I was on my way out the door because I was a fitness coach at the time and it was boot camp time. And I said, hey, are we ever going to do this? Are we ever going to move overseas or are we just talking? And he said, I mean, it's you who don't want to leave your mama and them and your daddy and your family. And I was like, oh, wait a minute. Wait a minute. So I gathered some information. I sent him an email so that he could see the opportunities that were there and let him know I was willing to leave. I am very close to my family, but I was definitely willing to leave because it was something that I'd always wanted to do. That was in, I think, March. We were interviewing in April. We had a contract signed by May. We spent June and July selling everything, saying goodbye to everybody. And then in August, we were on the plane. August 3rd or 4th, we were on our plane on the way to China. Our younger daughter had just turned 3 2 weeks before, and our younger daughter was 6.
Okay, so your youngest daughter was 3 and the oldest daughter was 6.
Yes.
Okay. And so they're fairly young at the time. And how did they adjust? Because did you put them in school? How did that work out?
Yeah, so we worked at international schools while we were in China. So it's English immersion schools. So that was good for them. At the first school where we taught, it was a Korean school. And so they were learning Korean, which was so freaking cute. It was just so cute. They adjusted. I would say the older one adjusted much more easily and much more quickly than the younger one. The little one wouldn't eat anything except for rice. She wouldn't talk at school. She was just, I think, very confused. She didn't understand, like, wait a second, what is this place? Who are these people? It was a year before she would eat anything that was not chicken or rice. And she's at the time, like she just seemed like she was watching everything, and not saying a whole lot. And then one day she opened her little mouth and all this Korean came out. We were like, oh my gosh.
She's like, I'm
Yes, it was precious. And she could hold conversations. And it took her a while. It took her a while to warm up. The older one adjusted much more quickly. She is a social butterfly. She will be the mayor of somewhere someday. So yeah, she was good.
Okay, so once you all started to adjust, well, let me ask you this before I go into that. Um, you also have a husband who went along with you, and how was that adjustment for the both of you? Because I know neither one of you were in your ideal countries. I mean, he wasn't in France, you weren't in
Mhm.
Spain. You're in China, totally different
Yeah.
atmosphere, different language, symbols, all of the things, right?
Mhm.
So, how did you all adjust as an adult?
You know what? I tell people all the time, we didn't have any culture shock. It was harder for us to move back to the United States after we were done than it was for us to move to China. And that is
Okay.
just real. We went over there without many expectations. We were just wide-eyed and excited to see what it would bring. The hardest thing, of course, was the language. And I thank Google, Google Translate and other apps for helping us through. But when you're an expat, you have a community of other people who are also not from that country. And so the camaraderie that you build and the willingness that people have to help you really helped us to figure things out. We had really good welcoming and onboarding, or we had really great colleagues, and it was just I would say, probably an ideal situation. We didn't feel like somebody had just launched us into a foreign land, although that is exactly what happened. We were just able to make those adjustments, and we looked at things like an adventure instead of a burden, because it was an adventure and it was something that we volunteered for. And so it was an opportunity for us to learn something new every day, which is what we did. And the transition from the very American, fast paced, rest when you're dead way of life to somewhere that is like that when it comes to education. But, when education is done for the day, which can be very late, countrywide, there is communal. It's a communist country and they believe in community. And so, in China, every night, people go outside and they dance with each other. And we didn't know that, but that is what happens. There are these squares in every neighborhood. And when people get off work and they get home from school, they take their radios outside and everybody dances all over the place. So that environment where we were able to step away from the pace that we were used to and really get to see each other and get to see our kids and the world differently was really awesome for us. That is one of the things that I miss the most. I miss that so much.
Yeah, I lived in Korea, and so, well, I didn't see the dancing, but definitely the community aspect of it. And unfortunately, I was thrown like, yo, here's quarantine for 2 days. Go for what you know.
Oh
I
man.
don't know anything. So yeah, that's not a really good welcoming experience. However, I made it. I was, at a concert in 2 days on my
Uh-oh.
own with no phone, no nothing, no Google Translate. I'm getting on the subway. Here's the subway map. now I'm going to navigate to this good old concert. These people said they're going to meet at this time at whatever, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
functioning, so we'll figure it out.
Yeah.
But it would have been nice to have a welcoming committee who told me about the things.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I'm glad you guys had that. Now, I've been to China, um, and it was an experience. I didn't have all the things that the blogs talk about. I didn't have people looking at me and staring at me, maybe the children.
Mm.
Uh, but how was it being a Black family in a very homogeneous society like China?
Oh, baby. All right. We did have the blog experience. We did. Not only are we Black, but we're very tall. I am almost 6 feet tall. My husband is almost 6'6". Our children are very tall. And so we drew a lot of attention. Um, at first, it was fun and cute, and then it wasn't. You know,
Mm.
now we lived in two very different cities. The first one was why am I drawing a blank? The first one was Weihai, which is in northeast China, and it's small by Chinese standards. The
Okay.
population in that city is bigger than the population of Mississippi, but it is considered a small town, which makes me laugh. So there were only a few million people there. And we would walk around and people want to take pictures and they want to do videos, and they do it whether you ask them not to or not. And that was very frustrating. And once we learned what people were saying, well, that made things a little bit harder, as you could probably imagine. So we did experience a good amount of racism while we were there, not only in the small town, but also when we moved to the bigger city, which we thought wouldn't be as much of a problem, but it was. It was more of a problem than I anticipated. That being said, for every horrible person, there were about 3 fantastic people. And that's how it is. I will tell people all the time, I'm from Mississippi. Ain't no racism like Mississippi racism. You know, I mean, it's blatant. It is in your face. Um, People are very clear. They make it abundantly clear how they feel about you and where you stand. That has been my experience since I was a kid. It's funny now that my children are not having the same experience here in Mississippi as I did growing up, which is, I think, great. Like, it just shows that there's some progress that people don't talk about enough. But that is the reality. But while we were there, man, oh man, I don't know if this is a topic that we're going to delve into later, if you would like to jump into it now, but we had some issues even at our school. Now, at the first school with the Korean students, I only had a problem from one student. And when I looked him in the eye and let him know what the deal was, I never had another problem from him again. While we were there, we had people who would invite us into their homes and teach us how to make dumplings. We had people who just really wanted to befriend us, and just, I mean, humanity, humanity is pretty much the same all over the place. I went to go and get a tattoo once, and there was a spot in the middle of this city called Koreatown, and it's great. I mean, it's really cute, and it's all Korean businesses, and it's just really great. And that's where the tattoo artist was. So I went over, and he worked on my tattoo, and he asked if I wanted something to eat. And since I was American, he asked me if I wanted a burger. But I don't eat meat, so I was like, no, thank you. So at the time, I was pescatarian, transitioning to vegetarian and ultimately veganism. And so I was in that pescatarian stage, and he said, give me just a minute. And he left. And then he came back and he said, the food will be here in a few minutes. Now, this is all happening. I was pretty new. So I'm trying to speak to him and he's trying to speak to me, and we don't know what either one of us is saying. So here we are using our cell phones to communicate. A few minutes later, his family comes in with a feast, and it was incredible. It was fish, it was rice, it was vegetables, it was tea, it was the whole night. It was delicious. And we sat down and we ate and we talked about Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen. It was incredible. It was amazing. One of my favorite experiences being there. And then when we were done, he would not allow me to walk home, and everybody walks there, He was like, no, 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 no. And he gave me a ride home, and that was the person that I kept going to after that. and that I kept referring people to. He was just really fantastic. And we had similar experiences in Guangzhou as well, but Guangzhou is the sixth largest city in China, and they have a part of the city called Little Africa. And I thought, ignorantly and naively, that we might be more welcome there. And that is something that people kept telling us. Oh, it's a bigger city. You'll be more welcome. You'll be more welcome. And we were not.
Hey there, I know that you're listening to my podcast, but did you know that I was a life coach? Well, I specialized in emotional intelligence coaching, and my expertise is in expat coaching as well as helping women design a softer life. So, you're listening to Life's a Vacay. And the one thing that I truly live by is that my life is a vacay. Every day I wake up and do the things that I love. So I blur the lines consistently between work and play. And I play more than I work. And if you're ready to escape all of the hustle culture, stop doing things that you don't love, and start living a life that's more aligned with your authentic powers and desires, then hit me up. Go to www.chadjones.com and book a free discovery call. It's that simple. I'm not for everybody, but isn't it worth exploring? If I'm for you, I see you there.
It was very difficult. And I had students who told me that I was not qualified to teach them. I was biased about Black history because I was Black. And anything that I said, they needed to hear it from a white teacher for it to be confirmed. And
Wow.
so that experience turned into something I never anticipated. I thought to myself, okay, I'm an educator, I'm not a drill sergeant. So discipline is not the way to go about fixing this. Education is. And what that turned into was ultimately, I went and rounded up all the teachers in the school who were on board and said, hey, we got a racism problem. I went and talked to the principal. Hey, I don't know if you know this, but you have a serious racism problem at this school. And with your support, I want to do something about it. I had his full support. Teachers got behind me. We ended up creating this entire initiative where we audited everybody's syllabus to see, are you teaching anything from Black people, so that these people know that Black people are indeed qualified and educated, and that white people are not the only people who've ever accomplished anything. One of these students told me that white men saved the world, and if it would not have been for white men, my people would not ever have been civilized, and neither would hers have been.
Oh, wow.
And so I'm thinking, like, where is this coming from? Like, what is happening? At first I was just very confused, but then I realized, this is ignorance. And in the United States, they say racism is ignorance. I don't believe that. It's been too long for it to be ignorance in the United States. At this point, it is willful ignorance. If you're racist, you're doing it on purpose, right? And it's very deep-seated, and it is a hatred, and it is because of privilege and all these other things. But in China, it's just because somebody told them this foolishness and they believe it, right? And so what I saw was, the more education that we gave, the fewer problems we had. And it was really, really interesting to watch over the course of 3 years. Students went from, if they were not the people who thought like that, at first they would sit silently and allow it. And then over the course of 3 years, they started to speak up. These students started learning more about their own people and taking more pride in who they were. And they started asking really great questions. We saw kids start doing reports about issues in Black history that people are scared to talk about here in the United States. And it was just really amazing. And when we were getting ready to come home, George Floyd had recently happened, and students were asking so many questions, and they wanted to watch the trial. And it was just really an incredible transformation to witness, when we were able to sit down and have real conversations about where all this comes from, and how we are real people. And if you are sitting in a classroom with me and you don't feel threatened, Maybe it's because Black people are not inherently violent and dangerous, and we had students who were challenging their parents, and it was just so interesting to watch some of these changes take place.
Well, Jasmine, I have to jump in now and ask because we're in China, right?
Mm-hmm.
Communist China. And I know firsthand, just being in China, that, their sense are not. And as I taught in Korea at a university, I had a couple Chinese students who were delightful. They were my best students. I loved them, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I also know that in China, everything is censored, right? So
Yes.
they wouldn't know a lot of things, or they would only know things that are skewed to a certain view, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's, I would see that it would be very difficult to try to change, thought processes if everybody is thinking a certain way because the government is pushing a certain agenda, right? How do you how do you get like children who their parents have been indoctrinated to view? Because I remember, I know Tiananmen Square happened, right?
Yes. Yes.
They don't know Tiananmen Square
That's
happened.
right.
Like,
That's right.
China, you know Tiananmen Square happened. You don't know what happened to that man. Where he at? He disappeared after he was stood up
Yes.
to the tanks. So it's interesting when you're in countries like China, which in 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 the midst of everything, everything seems very normal. But when you start having conversations, especially as an outsider who has context about certain things, and then
Mm-hmm.
you get in the midst of it and you start having conversations, and they looking at you like, "Girl, what are you talking about? That is not
Yeah.
like that's not non-existent." You go to they Google, and
Mm-hmm.
there's not there, right?
Right.
Um, like how do you deal with that?
Yeah, so we certainly had those experiences. So we taught at this school that cost a lot of money to go to. And what this
Mm-hmm.
means is that these students have traveled. They've been all over the world. But whenever they go to places in the United States, they're just staying in, five-star hotels and not really interacting with a whole lot of people. So what has happened is that their parents and the government, you are right, have told them people who look like this are good, people who look like this are bad. Even when you get on the subway, they would have these posters, or, it's really not, sometimes it's posters, but it's a TV with these commercials telling you when to go find security. And they had this one where you're supposed to go find security if a big Black man with a gold chain walks onto the train. So
In
then one
China,
time, yeah,
in
one time
China.
a kid looked at the screen and then they looked at my 6 foot tall, 6'5", 6'6" Black husband and got scared. Right. And so it's all around them. The BS is all around them. Okay. That being said, when you are in that classroom, because of the systemic respect that they have for education itself, you already carry a certain amount of ethos. So I used it to my advantage. Hey, I already have ethos because I'm your teacher, number one. Number two, I know that as sideways as you want to get, you're only going to push the envelope so far. These are things that I know. Okay. So I have a captive audience and I just used every tool in my toolbox to my advantage. Also, the principal was very supportive. And so after he knew that this was happening, he became very vocal. And he would say, if you have a problem with the fact that we have Black teachers and Black admin at this school, there are other schools that you are welcome to take your children to. And so
Mm-hmm.
that was really fantastic that we had support from him. But I had one student who, we had at this point, we had talked about Mansa Musa, we had read Malcolm X, we're learning about Angela Davis, the whole nine. All right. And this girl, she came up to me and she was crying and she said, when you have a minute, can I talk to you? I got a minute right now. All right. So we took a few minutes and she said, I went home and I told my parents about everything that I'm learning in your class, and I was really excited about it. And they told me that the school is brainwashing me and that you are brainwashing me and that I just don't know enough Black people yet. And when I do, I will see that they know what they're talking about. All right, like as her parents. So she said she went and she talked to their friends who she thought would be more reasonable, and they supported her parents. And so she was crying and she said, I just don't know who to believe. I said, okay, well, let me ask you a few questions. And she said, all right. I said, I got to back up. Her parents and her parents' friends said that Black people were dangerous, uneducated, and impoverished. All right. Those were the three things. So I said, okay, let's start here. You've been sitting in my classroom for 6 months. Do you feel like you're in danger? No. I said, okay, so am I dangerous? No. I said, okay. Number two, I'm your teacher. Can I read? Have I taught you anything? Of course you can read. Of course you've taught me things. I said, okay. Would you consider me uneducated? Absolutely not. I said, okay. You know how much your parents pay for you to come to this school. You probably know how much teachers at this school make. Am I impoverished? No. I said, well, baby, you already know who you believe. So, I mean, that's the answer to your question. You sit here with me every single day. All right. Your parents are talking because they don't have the experience that you've had. They've just been told something. And my favorite quote is from John Milton, who wrote Paradise Lost. And before he wrote Paradise Lost, he wrote this, it was like a pamphlet. It's called Areopagitica. And in that pamphlet, what's happening is the British government is trying to censor books. Well, Milton was an author, so of course he was against this. And in that pamphlet, he says, if you believe something simply because your pastor or the assembly, meaning the government, says so, even if your belief be true, the very truth that you hold becomes a heresy. And what he's saying is that if you believe something just because somebody told you to, you don't even believe it. Like you haven't explored it. You don't even know what you believe. So I reminded her of that. You don't have to believe something because somebody told you to. If you have exposure to new information, intelligence is your ability to change your mind based on the exposure to that information, which is what Malcolm X said, which is my second favorite quote. So we talked about this, and I said to her, just because your parents believe something don't mean that you have to. Well, that's not something that you say to Chinese kids, but it's something that I said to her that day because it was important. So, knowing that students respected me enough to come and ask, knowing that they were going against what their parents had told them to believe, to me was a sign that there was some positive change happening, because it takes a lot of boldness and courage. In their culture, it's not like American kids where you can run off at the mouth and, say whatever. That free thought and free expression is not an inherent right in China.
Right.
And so, for them to ask these questions and to step outside of what they had been taught showed a lot of courage. And it was just really encouraging to see.
Well, good for you. I'm glad that you took the opportunity to make those teaching moments happen, because if, in those type of societies and countries and cultures and, governments sensory is going on, it's difficult, and sometimes it's very difficult to have champions that back you and support you, especially because the parents have so much pull and power.
Yes.
I know firsthand teaching in Korea, just to have parents, decide they don't want you at the school anymore and you get fired. Or students who don't want to do something. I taught at a university, so you're pretty much dealing with the actual individual versus their parents or the school system. But I had incidents where students would decide, okay, English doesn't matter. And even though I was teaching English communications, I had mostly students who would then go to countries like China and teach. So it was a little bit different because of the age, and but I still had students who had pushback, and they wanted to be drunk and come to your class and not learn anything, and then they realized I need this credit to actually graduate, and then now, okay, I don't want to do that work, I want to do this work.
Hey there, I know that you're listening to my podcast, but did you know that I was a life coach Well, I specialize in emotional intelligence coaching, and my expertise is in expat coaching as well as helping women design a softer life. So, you're listening to Life's a Vacay. And the one thing that I truly live by is that my life is a vacay. Every day I wake up and do the things that I love. So I blur the lines consistently between work and play. And I play more than I work. And if you're ready to escape all of the hustle culture, stop doing things that you don't love, and start living a life that's more aligned with your authentic powers and desires, then hit me up. Go to www.chadjones.com and book a free discovery call. It's that simple. I'm not for everybody, but isn't it worth exploring? If I'm for you, I see you there.
Well, what were we doing that? I'm just doing that. And you're gonna make my life harder because you decided to make no, we're not doing that. So
Yes.
and I remember having a meeting one time with our like dean's office, and this individual who came to work came to school every day and slept in my class and then flunked the final. And I was just like, okay, what are we talking about?
Yeah,
And they
you're
were like,
bad.
well, can you change it? And I was like, change it? No, he didn't change his behavior. I'm not
Right.
this. So I get it. It can be quite interesting when you start getting the pushback in the pool.
Mhm.
And I can even imagine how much more difficult it could be when you're talking about younger students and the
Mhm.
parents' influence, because and they're paying for it, right?
That's
So
right.
not only do I have influence, but I'm paying and I believe a certain thing. And so
Yes.
that can be detrimental. So I'm glad that you had an opportunity to not only, state facts, represent, and not that, because I hated being the total representation for all things Black. Because I'm like, what? And some of the things that they would say, like, oh, teacher, you from Africa. And I was like, I had a proud moment because I remember one of my students came to me and said, teacher, you're from Africa. And I was like, it's not Black. You have to prove I'm Black over here, And I
Yeah.
remember, like,
Yes.
my born name is LaChon, and nobody in America can say that, right? And so I was like,
Mhm.
oh, God. But they LaChon teacher, and I was like, some parts of me are proud, some parts of me is like, will you please stop calling me? I identify, but yeah. So I'm so happy that you had a voice, especially of reason, in China, and you're making you made a difference that I'm sure has a lasting effect today.
Mhm.
Now I want to talk, because this is all about Life's a Vacay,
Yeah.
and you had an experience. You and your family went to China and made a difference, and then you had to come home.
Yeah.
Um, but you are a writer.
Yes.
When did you decide, okay, I'm going to take this skill and I'm going to start using it and making a living off of it?
Okay. So, I guess the first time that I wrote something for money was when I was in high school. And I'm not going to say anything else about that so that I don't incriminate myself.
Inquiring minds really want to know that.
Okay,
Money.
this is what happened. This is what happened. There was an English teacher who was extremely difficult. She was mean as a snake, and she would give people grades that they did not deserve. All right. And I know I had a personal experience with her where I was gone on a field trip with one of these organizations, Beta Club or FBLA or something, one day. And when we came back from that field trip, she called 5 girls into the classroom who did not look like me to make up a pop quiz that she just happened to give on that day when we were gone. And I didn't know anything about this pop quiz. So we get our progress reports, and I've made straight hundreds in her class, and I see a 0 for a quiz grade. So I start asking, what was this? I don't remember ever missing a quiz. So, everybody starts looking at each other, and the 5 girls who got pulled in to take that quiz, they were, you know how it is. Like they looking at each other like, oh, should we say something? Should we not? So I said, Miss, whatever her name was, when did you give this quiz? So she starts stumbling over her words. I said, okay, don't worry about it. I went to the principal. I said, hey, she gave a quiz while I was out. She did not tell me about the makeup quiz. And now I have a 0, which has brought my 100 average to like a low B or something. And she's acting like she doesn't know what I'm talking about. So somebody needs to set this straight. All right. So the principal went to her and was like, come on, man, really? Now everybody knew that she wasn't anybody's favorite. All right. So I go in there, I take the quiz, okay? And she did stuff like this all the time, but everybody just didn't know how to advocate for themselves. So I had a couple of friends who were like, listen, I'm doing everything I can. She keeps giving me these grades that don't make sense. She won't explain them. I need help. Cool, I'll help you. I need money for prom. So they were like, that's not a problem. So I helped them with their term papers and they paid for it and everybody passed and everybody graduated. Now, that was the first time. Now, do I advocate for that as a teacher? By trade, I cannot. But at the time, I felt like I was doing a service to the brothers. All right. So I'm just going to be 100% real with you.
And we're writing papers for other individuals. Okay.
Yes, but it was for the cause. It was we had to graduate, and there was no way. I knew what kind of person she was, so it's not like they just weren't doing their work. You know, it wasn't a situation like that. And had it been, then I'd have been like, "That's your bad," but that's not what was happening. So I was like, "I got you." All right. Okay. Maybe I just incriminated myself. I don't know. I hope not. I hope that people can understand my heart. But in Jasmine's 17, 18-year-old mind, that's what I was thinking. Okay. Fast forward, I majored in English. I love English. I love words. I love speeches. I love to read. I love to write. I love communication. And, everybody needs you to look at something for them. Can you look over my resume? Can you do this? Can you do that? I got to give a presentation. Can you look over it? Make sure the grammar is good. Yeah, cool. And then I was like, I do this a lot, a whole lot. Maybe I should get paid for it. So I went online years and years later, went online and, found these job boards where you can do freelance work. And that was where I started. And so before we went to China, I started doing that. And then I started making pretty good money from it. So then I opened this LLC while we were in China with the intention of whenever we went home, this is what I would do full time until I figured out what I really wanted to do. And then we had to come home early. And the reason why is because my dad got sick. And so he was diagnosed with cancer. My mom had not yet retired. And when we got home, I said, you know what? I have this LLC. I can work this writing business, which will give me the flexibility to take daddy to treatment and to his doctor's appointments and everything that he needs to do. And so that's where it came from. That's what that is.
Well, which is a great segue because you are now an author.
Yes.
Congratulations. Kudos to you. The book that you have is entitled Keep Waking Up in the Morning. Mm-hmm. And morning spelled as in like grief or the death. And so your father unfortunately passed and you wrote this. It's more like a memoir, is it not?
Correct. It is. So
okay. Tell us about it.
Yeah. So my dad was just an extraordinary human. He just was. I mean, he was the apple of my eye and I was the apple of his. And I just think that we called him Superman, When he got sick and we came home, I knew that I needed to write about him, but I just had this resistance, this internal pushback, because it just felt so final to do the writing about him. I was like, nah, he's going to be here. He's going to be here. He's going to be here. Like, I don't need to write about him, But then I knew that he had a love for ancestry and a love for storytelling. And he would always tell us, hey, you need to go interview your grandparents, go interview your aunties and your uncles so that you can understand where you came from. So with the encouragement of one of my clients who was like, you got to write about him. Like, you can't not write about him. And I was like, yeah, I know. So I decided, okay, let's do it. But I'll do it in a different way than I initially thought that I would. So I went to him And I said, hey, let's me and you write this book about you, and let's write it about your life and all of your adventures and, our adventures together. Let's do this. And he said, okay. So I started doing the interviews. Well, into a few of those interviews, he had a stroke. And so it just got very hard for him to speak. He kept doing it though. Like he kept pushing through, and I have these saved on my phone, and I just really treasure them now that he's not here. But it's also kind of haunting to listen to him talk before that stroke and then listen to him talk after that stroke and just see how hard he was working. And I was taking him to therapy and rehab for that, like speech therapy and everything. It was a wild ride. It was 14 months. It was just crazy. And then he died. And of course, we didn't finish that book. So after he died, I was in the worst place, in just the worst place. It was like somebody just turned all the lights off and dropped me in a hole. And I really didn't care if I came out of it or not. I just couldn't imagine life without him in it. He was everything. So I put it aside for a few months, and I was just not doing well at all. And I said, okay, I need somewhere to put this energy. And I think that the best thing I can do is finish this book. I think it would just be the best way to honor him. I opened it up and I looked at it, and it was obvious to me that I needed to change trajectory. And I wasn't exactly sure what to do at first, but I knew that I had to change it all from present tense to past tense, which was brutal. So then I was looking at it and I was like, all right, here's what we're going to do. We're going to make this a book about, like, I'm going to take all these stories and pull the lessons from them and talk about how those lessons helped me navigate his illness, his death, and, grief. And so that's what the book became. And it's a collection of stories. Some of them are really funny. Some of them are serious. Of course, a bunch of them are sad. But it goes, it's like a flashback. So you'll see what's happening right now, like me driving behind the ambulance to the hospital for the last time, the hospital where he died. And then it would flash back to something else and then pull the lesson for how, that is a help, or was a help for me at the time, and is still a help for me now. And one of the things that he would always tell us when we were growing up, how you ask your parents a question and they don't think you're old enough yet to understand. And so they say, we'll tell you when you're older, or you'll understand when you're older. He didn't say that. What he said instead was, just keep waking up in the morning. You'll get it. Just keep waking up in the morning. And that was after he had already explained things to us. But if we just couldn't grasp it, that would be his go-to. Just keep waking up in the morning. So when I was trying to figure out what to name this book, and I had a bunch of titles, and a lot of them were really terrible, I knew that I wanted it to be one of his sayings. And that one was resounding, but I went, it's just not quite right. And then one day I woke up and I went, morning, MOURNING, not MORNING. And that just made sense to me. And so that's the name of it. Keep waking up in the morning, just full of all these stories that really speak to the kind of man he was. He was a man of love and grace and family and communication. He was just legit, and he was where I went to learn how to love myself. I'm a lot. And I know that. And he never tried to make me be smaller. He never did that. He always was like a place where I could go and be myself in full and get support from him. Even when we said that we were moving overseas to China, my mama was not trying to hear it. I was taking her 3- and 6-year-old granddaughters across the ocean. What was wrong with me? And my daddy went, you know what? I'm glad you're going. I knew if one of my kids would, there's 5 of us. I knew if anybody would do something like this, it would be you. And you need to, because when the world calls you, you have to answer. That's the kind of person he was, just gave me space to live. And I could not see myself being anywhere other than by his side during that entire fight. And it was really one of the sweetest, most important times of my life to have the honor to walk with him through all of that. It was hard. This man was always the fittest man in any room. He was super smart. He worked at NASA. He won awards at NASA. My dad was brilliant. And when he couldn't speak anymore, and when it got hard for him to get an idea from his head to our ears, and just watching his body deteriorate, and he couldn't breathe, and it was just so difficult. But I was very happy, and thrilled to have the support of my husband and my daughters to come home and be nowhere else while that was happening. You know, it just really put so many things in perspective. But then when he died, shortly after that, I turned 40. And now I'm like, oh, I'm running out of time. And so that's what I've been dealing with, you know, for the past few months. You don't have forever. I thought my daddy would be here forever, and he wasn't. And he died when he was 67. And that, yeah, it was really, it's a neon flashing sign to me that you better live, because you're going to run out of time. It doesn't matter how fit you are. It doesn't matter. Nothing matters except for the decisions that you make today to live the life that is calling you. So, yeah, I mean, that man, he taught me so much. He taught me so much. I will always be so grateful and feel so lucky to have had him to be my dad.
And now you have such a wonderful angel that's walking beside you right here in
Mhm.
reality. Um, I love the title, Keep Waking Up in the Morning, because, you know, I think it for anybody that's going through grief, that's the most difficult thing to do is to get
Oh, yeah.
up the next day,
Yes.
right? And to keep
Yes.
on keeping on. And then to wake up in the actual morning of it all,
Mhm.
the the remembering of how wonderful this person was, the things I didn't get to say, the things I
Mhm.
wish I would have done differently. And I think for someone who is grieving, this is a must have. Like, and I love the play on the words, but I also love the fact that it means so many different things, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, I can keep doing things the same way. Um, I can wake up differently tomorrow because what I did yesterday doesn't really mean the same thing because I have a
Mhm.
newfound understanding, which was what he was telling you as a child. You keep
Yes.
waking up, you're gonna understand what I'm
Yes.
talking about. What I'm putting down, you're gonna understand. So
Yes.
you're gonna get it finally. That comes with maturity, right? And
Mhm.
even in the grief and the death process, there's a level of maturity that you have because now this person that used to be here in the flesh is now transcended to the spiritual. And
Mhm.
now, if I keep waking up and having conversations with them in the midst of them not physically being here, but them spiritually being here to tell me stories
Yeah.
and to guide me and direct me,
Yeah.
depending on how you believe, right?
Yeah.
So that's amazing. What I want is for you to get me a like a snippet of you reading your favorite passage
Oh,
so that I
yes.
can leave it in the notes so that you can
Let
have.
me, I thought I had it right next to me, but I gotta give me a second. So this book.
I can hear you.
Okay, how about now?
Okay. Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, so I had to reach over. I knocked some stuff down trying to grab the book, but the book that is sitting next to me that I thought was mine was written by a friend's daughter, young daughter, who went through just several deaths. Boom, 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 right next to each other. And she wrote this poetry book, Thank You for Painting the Sky. And it's beautiful. And so the coloration is similar. I can show it to you.
Sure.
Um, and she's young, she's like 19 years old. So I don't know, it's blurry, but yeah. Anywho, it's a book of poems, and like she lost her best friend, she lost her grandfather, and just, well, you know, lost a bunch of people at the same time. And grief is just something that we all at some point, we can't avoid it, you know. We just got to figure out how to deal. Okay, you said my favorite. Oh, baby, let's see. Which one's my favorite? Okay, I'm gonna give you a couple of options, and then you tell
Okay.
me which one you would rather hear. So there's one where he teaches me how to walk in high heels. There is one about his last meal, which was cake donuts. And then there's like the one about how I gave myself permission to not always be sad because it's not proof of how much you love somebody. So which one of those would you rather hear?
I'm gonna go with the high heels, even though I
Okay.
want to hear the last one, but go ahead. Let's go with the high heel one.
All righty. So let me find it right quick. All right. Okay. Now, let me preface by saying this. I'm a tomboy, which I wish there was another word for that. But you're talking to somebody who, if I could, I would wear sweatpants, hoodies, and flip-flops my entire life. And so just keep that in mind. How long of an excerpt do you think that you want?
A couple minutes,
Couple
just to
minutes.
kind of close us out.
All right. All right. I might skip some spots, but okay.
Okay.
My 7th grade classmates elected me to represent them as a maid on the Valentine's court, the junior high equivalent of the high school's homecoming court. I was honored until I realized I had to stand in front of the whole school in a dress. I was growing about an inch a day and tripping over the lines on the sidewalk. If anybody was going to stumble over their own feet and slide across the floor in front of the student body, it was going to be me. Up to that point, I'd only really dressed up for church on Sundays, save the turquoise miniskirt I wore in kindergarten until the seam screamed it was time to let it go. Clothes in the 90s all seemed to have built-in hips for hips I didn't have and built-in cups for boobs I didn't have. On top of that, my measurements were 36, 36, 36. Department stores were equipped for Betty Boop. I was olive oil. My look consisted mainly of sweatpants or jeans and t-shirts. The jeans were never long enough and tall cuts wouldn't exist for another few years. My toenails were discolored from playing 2 sports, so I never wore open-toed anything, which meant you could always find me in socks and a pair of tennis shoes. But sweats and sneakers couldn't happen the night of the big dance. My parents came to the rescue. Mama and I searched every store in the mall until we found a gorgeous dress in her favorite color at the time, hunter green. It was satin with a flowery lace overlay, A-cut, finished with a shiny ribbon that circled my torso right under my chest. It was short, which surprised me because Mama was only about one step from being a merchandiser for the Amish. And to top it off, she bought me a pair of pointy-toed velvet heels with little corsets on the vamp. I tried the shoes on in the store, of course, but I didn't plan to put them on again until the big night. Other people walked in heels every day. I could figure it out when the time came. Then I remembered how that plan didn't work when I tried to take the same approach to swimming years before. So I'm going to skip that part, but that part is about me thinking I could just jump in the water and almost died. So learning that swimming did not come natural. And that part's funny, but for time, I'm going to skip it. Thinking about how walking in those heels would be as natural as swimming, I got anxious. The night before I had to transform from tomboy to top model in an auditorium full of my classmates who were surely expecting more than I had to give, Daddy called me into his room so I could show him my ensemble. He complimented the dress and the shoes, and seeing 2 inches more than I was used to, he asked, "Do you know how to walk in those heels?" "I can put them on my feet and get from point A to point B, but I don't think it looks like it's supposed to," I said. "Well, women don't really walk in heels anyway. You got to glide in them. You got to sway. Let me show you," he said. "Show me? Daddy?" Maybe he was planning to flip through the channels and draw arrows on the TV screen with a dry erase marker, coaching me up on a proper strut using some actress or model as an example. But no, he got up from the bed and started from the far corner of the room to give himself some space. He stood up straight like he had a rod in his back, stuck his chest out, tilted his wrist into 90-degree angles, and put one foot in front of the other, swinging his narrow hips from left to right. It was one of the most amazing things I had ever seen. This might have been my first lesson in nuance. When he saw I could use some help, he wasn't concerned about any perception. He wanted to make sure his baby girl was prepared. I'm sure he knew how self-conscious I was. He had front row seats to my daily awkwardness, watching me bump into walls that had always been there and trip over my own feet, failing to keep up with growth spurts. He didn't seem embarrassed in the least practicing the catwalk in his room that night, but if he was, it was just to keep me from feeling that way in front of everybody else. After his demonstration, he made me put the shoes on to practice. We practiced until he felt like my walk was tolerable. Then he sent me to bed. I went to bed a little more confident and prepared for the next night. But even more than that, I was amused. Daddy could barbecue, fix cars, pull wiggly teeth, revive dead plants, coach championship teams, weld Navy ships, and sway in high heels. So yeah, there's that part.
I think there couldn't be any better way to end this segment. Thank you for sharing. And please tell people how they can get that book.
All right. So you can go to Jasmine Cochran, JasmineCochran.com, or you can just go straight to Amazon, type in Jasmine Cochran, Keep Waking Up in the Morning, or Keep Waking Up, or probably just Jasmine Cochran, and it'll pop right up.
Thank you, Jasmine. Thank you for joining us today. And I appreciate you being here and allowing us to have a glimpse of your story, from living in China to disciplining and correcting and leaving the Chinese students that you taught something to not only ponder, but to practice. And then also being able to leave your father's story and giving other people who have grief an opportunity to keep waking up in the morning. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure.
Likewise.
You have been listening to Life's a Vacay podcast. Thank you for tuning in today. Every day you have a choice, so choose yourself and never allow your circumstances to dictate the life you live. Whatever you don't like, you can change. Remember, nothing happens overnight, but know that when you set goals and take inspired action, whatever you desire can come in perfect timing. Never give up on creating the life you deserve. Don't anticipate your next vacation when you could be living a whole life on vacation. Until next time, I'm your host, Cha Jones. Please remember to like and share this podcast so that others can be inspired. Peace.